Ladies and gentlemen, I once again welcome you to our first panel discussion, which is on perfecting supply and demand. And for this very significant panel discussion, let me take the honor of introducing our eminent panelists. Mr. Ashutosh Verma, National Sales Head, Hero MotoCorp. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for all the dignitaries. Mr. Ravneet S. Fokela, Chief Business Officer, Ather Energy. Mr. Sabyasachi Chakraborty, National Head Sales, Two-Wheeler, Greaves Electric Mobility. Mr. Shashank Srivastav, Executive Director, Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Mr. Tarun Garg, Hyundai Motor India. Mr. Vikas Pandey, Executive Vice President, HDFC Bank. I request you all to kindly put your hands together for all these eminent panelists. Mr. Soham Mishra, State Chairperson, West Bengal. And Mr. Hormuz Surabji, Editor, Autocar India. Our heartfelt gratitude to all the gentlemen on the dais. And now I would hand over the reins of moderation to Mr. Surabji. I request you to kindly take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, FADA, for having me moderate this interesting panel, which is perfecting supply and demand. It's an interesting topic to talk about. Not sure how easy it is to do in this kind of very VUCA world. But I think clearly supply and demand has been turned on its head. It's topsy-turvy. I think anyone who could accurately forecast what was happening would really be a billionaire today. But it is very, very challenging. And I thought I'd just start off with the two big four-wheeler OEMs on the subject. Shashank, with you. Supply, demand, there clearly seems to be a sort of mismatch because at the lower end, there's enough supply, but demand is not there. At the higher end, it's kind of vice versa. So, just looking at these dynamics, quite unique. Just your thoughts. And obviously, I think now semiconductor issue is fading. It's more about other issues which are sort of constraining supply as well.
Yeah, thank you, Hormuz. First of all, one observation, and I completely agree with you. The total pending bookings in the industry are quite high compared with the supply position. And in fact, that's been going on for about the last 12, 14 months. Largely because the supply hasn't kept pace with the increased bookings that we have seen. As a result, there is a build-up of bookings in the industry. By some estimates, it's between 750 to 775,000. In fact, today I was checking Maruti Suzuki alone has about 427,000 bookings.
That would be the higher end, I would imagine.
Yes and no, and I'll come to that point where there is a little bit of, I think my thoughts are a little different, which is that it is not necessarily a high-end versus a low-end equation. It is because the chip availability and these bookings have actually become pending because of the non-availability of vehicles is really related to those specific chips for each model. And at the moment, yes, it does appear that it is more on the high end, and it's true for Maruti Suzuki as well. But for example, a lower end vehicle with CNG, for example, in Maruti's stable, still has a lot of waiting. So it's not just because the CNG controller has a chip which is currently in short supply. I would say, if you look at a more macro level, it is basically where the forecasted numbers have been higher or lower than the supply. And that means the segments which have been forecasted to grow at slower and have grown faster than expected, these are the places where you see, and that is true actually for a lot of those high-end models as well.
Right. Tarun, turning to you, clearly forecasting is a big challenge. I don't know if there's any algorithm that can figure it out, but just taking from where Shashank said, that seems to be that the chip still holds you hostage in terms of a few models, which are an issue. And just your thoughts on the going forward, especially predicting supply and demand dynamics. I'm sure very, very difficult. And perhaps even how the customer has changed. Clearly now he's willing to wait and even pay a higher price with no discount and stuff like that, which in a way is a good thing. So just your thoughts on this.
So first things first, look, I have been here for now close to 3 decades, and I think about 50% of that time has been spent in sales planning, for trying to forecast. And frankly speaking, this demand-supply gap is not a new thing. It has always happened. Probably, because we had some tough times in 2019. So we all thought that, okay, supply would always be more than demand. And then, of course, COVID struck, which was a new animal and nobody knew. So maybe it looks much more startling as of now. So that is the first thing, that it's nothing new that the mismatch between demand and supply. Now what has happened is, with gradually easing out of the semiconductor situation, at least the overall numbers are increasing very clearly, which is also good. Why I say that is because at least now you can offer something to the customer. Because till about, say, 3 months back, every variant used to be on waiting. But now you can say, okay, I don't have A, but I can offer you B, which is very good, because especially when we are entering the festival season. The third aspect is, as far as Hyundai is concerned, yes, very clearly what we have seen is that with the aspirations changing, for the customers, they are really wanting more and more top-end trims. For example, the top-end trim penetration is now hovering around 20%, for all our cars put together, which used to be 14-15%. On top of it, as it is, SUV demand continues to go up now more than hatches. So I think it is also to do with, one, of course, more chips required in high-end cars. Two, the customer really moving up, and now that he's spending so much of time in the car, he really does not want to compromise. So he's really wanting to go for high-end trims. And thanks to my friends in SDFC, they're making it very easier, for them to really. So it's all, an effect of that. Yes, it looks that, the demand is much more for high-end trims. Going forward, the way I see the global trends, hopefully things are going to improve pretty fast, and I believe that this trend of pending bookings will surely come down in the next 3-4 months, not only for Hyundai, but I think as an industry as a whole, is what my expectation is.
Right. Good points, Tarun. I'm going to just circle back, just get opening remarks from everyone on this, turning to the two-wheeler side. Ashutosh, I think you're in a way at the other end, and clearly for you, two-wheeler segment, especially at the lower end, rural segment. Well, I think retails have been a little better in August, but clearly still a lot of stress. So clearly a lot of issue on the demand side. So just wanted to understand, how do you think this is going to pan out, and, how are you all managing it? Because clearly supply is there, but demand is where I think needs to really perk up.
Sure. So, just on a lighter note, I guess if you compare the am I audible? Get closer. Sorry, apologize for my bad throat. So on a lighter note, if you look at the situation that most of the PV players and EV players in, as compared to that situation, our situation in the ICE two-wheeler looks a lot more uglier. But on a serious note, I guess, if you look at the way that demand has manifested this year, different segments, of course, are manifesting in terms of demand at different periods of the year. Q1, for example, was big for some of the rural markets on the back of marriage demand, and we saw just the situation kind of turn on its head where the supply was far lower than what we could provide to the market. I think what we have seen in Q2 moving forward is that the urban markets have started manifesting with the school, colleges opening almost after 3 years. We've seen customers flocking to in the urban markets, and we're seeing that demand pick up. I think one important point also to note here is that when people talk about rural stress versus urban stress, it's also, and I think kind of furthering the point that Tarun was making, it's also about the changing consumer behavior in the rural markets. So for example, all those pin codes for us, we used to sell, let's say, more entry-level products, have started showing a greater contribution of some of the products which were not entry in terms of pricing. And I guess this change in consumer behavior has started happening. Unfortunately, the industry measures rural response with sale of certain products, and I guess kind of typecasts that rural is under stress. But I guess it's the evolving consumer behavior that also needs to be kind of factored in.
Right. And, turning to the EV players, clearly the new phenomenon. Ravneet sir, starting with you, obviously, there has been supply constraints, just looking at the numbers. In the sense that, is supplies an issue, or, obviously there's the demand for two-wheeler EVs has been galloping, or is it, just the ability to scale up so fast that does take time? Obviously, I'm sure there must be a whole lot of components. The supply industry is not as well developed in the EV space as it is with ICE. That could also be a limitation. So just want to get your sense on the supply dynamics in particular.
So I think from an EV perspective, we have a lot many more moving parts than when you compare it to ICE, so that makes availability even more, right? Sure, there has been an issue on the chip side, semiconductor side, but we also had issue on the cell side, which is an issue that is, ICE players don't have to worry about. And not just that, from a supply perspective, even what you would normally consider parts which are not difficult to scale up, like the mechanicals, etc., they also took a long time for players to sort of come in and start scaling up, because there is a lot of newness in there, right? So, things like frame design, chassis design, etc., they're all sort of new design. So that was the issue. So it's not just scarcity, it's also about the learning curve, right? Then there is the other issue of just variability to understand the market, because firstly the transition from petrol to ICE, that's sort of an unknown. There was this conjecture. Now within that, there are new people sort of coming in, launching new products. So for them to find their own product market fit. So the larger point I'm making, Harmas, is that the moving parts are a lot many more on this side than the other side. But if you look at overall where we are today, I've been in this business for about 7 years now. And the better part of the 7 years has been really worrying about how to unlock demand. So that we always believe there's latent demand. We believe that the industry would flip almost overnight. But for the longest time it didn't. But it's been about 12 months or so now. Demand unlocking is the least of our worries. It really is the ability to keep pace with demand. And for industry that's been looking at worrying about unlocking demand for the longest time, to see month on month, not being able to service more than 25-30% of the orders of that month, it's actually gut-wrenching, right? But the good news is, in the last 2-3 months, the semiconductor situation is easing out. Therefore, there's a lot more predictability. On the other side, because of the nature of where we are, most EVs work on a pre-order model, so there's a reasonable predictability on the next few months or so. But the very volatile gap that we saw, and the very volatile mismatch that we saw, that seems to be sort of plateauing out or not. I don't think we're in a situation where you risk cash and carry for a while. But those, really, shots in the dark, which we used to make about 4-5 months back, I think that's coming down. There's a lot more sanity in the situation now.
Right. And Sabyasachi, just taking off from what Ravneet said, obviously demand not a problem right now. It's really been unlocked. I think hard to keep pace with it. Would you echo his sentiments? I mean, especially on the supply side, I just want to ask you, are there, for example, are there a lot of imported components right now? Again, given the fact that, the basics are not indigenized as yet. So just trying to understand, especially even from the battery side and certain controllers, obviously the chips, all that. So, would you kind of, anything to add to what Ravneet has said?
Yeah, I think I will agree with what Ravneet has said. Demand is at the moment not the biggest of our issues. But fortunately at Greaves we have been able to work out on the supply side pretty well as of now. And yes, we have some challenges which are slightly different, especially from a channel or a dealer perspective, is the logistics issue of transportation all the way up to the northeast and the various markets which are there. Those are the challenges that we are trying to get over as of now. But in terms of the components, see, we have got about 250 components, 249 components in our vehicle today, of which 5 of them are the most critical components. So once you are able to keep those 5 in the right place at the moment, I think more or less we are there. So as of now, what we have seen, we don't have the challenge in terms of both the supply side and the demand side. It is, as of now, even Stevens. I think what we had also heard is that a very important point of how are you doing the right kind of sales planning. Now, sales planning obviously has also evolved to a large extent today. And we have been fortunate that our planning has been pretty accurate to a large extent, not 100%, but to a large extent. So that has probably helped us to remain afloat at the moment, as we had put it.
Right. So I'm turning to you. Clearly, given this current situation, which is supply constrained, in a way it's been good for the dealers. Inventories are low. Dealerships are in a healthier position. I mean, is this? I mean, how are you all coping in this situation? I think on the one hand, it's pretty good, but of course, waiting lists go on, which isn't also good. So, just your thoughts on the whole supply-demand mismatch right now.
Yeah, thank you, Hamzad. So, I think over the last 2 years, we've all faced the issue of the pandemic, and we have faced it pretty well, I would say. Largely, we have survived with the help of our OEMs and hand-holding with them. We've understood that whatever was available with the minimal stocks also, we were able to maintain healthy sales volumes. I think that was only possible because we were closely working together and understanding the demand was of course there, but whatever stock was there, we focused on selling those stocks. I think that is something which even going forward, I feel that we need to work very, very closely with our respective OEMs as dealers to, forecast properly, because as rightly mentioned by most of my co-panelists here, it is actually the shift in the customer, the demand, which is to be properly studied, and I think it is more regional. So I would request that every OEM works closely with the dealer fraternity as well as their regional offices put together to understand their region's demand and the variant-wise mix well, so that every dealer is able to match their bookings with whatever stocks can be supplied by the OEMs. I understand that the higher variant is a current issue, but whatever we can do as dealers to convert those bookings to the next segment, the next variant with our customers, we will always be willing to do that, yes.
I think that's a good point, because clearly I think it's all again down to the planning, because you can't just throw a switch and just change the mix overnight. There is some lead time in that. We'll discuss that as well. But Vikas, you've heard everyone right now, and dealers, they are in a healthier position. You finance them, so your thoughts. I mean, what's your advice to them right now?
Yeah. So just allow me 3-4 minutes to just cover this point. We have a Trinity working here. There's an OEM. There's dealers and their finances. So, and everybody's playing their role. I think I'll try to connect the dots that, how this entire thing, and while we have spoken multiple times on this subject, but still would like to highlight and maybe add a couple of points around it. Starting with the banker's perspective, I think we like, any bankers like transparency, and I would like to give an example that, so starting from OEM point where the cars are getting, say, shipped to a dealer's stock level, if we have a win data available, and there's a lot of headway which we have made with a few OEMs, and we are expecting, more to also come in there. That helps in terms of monitoring the entire stock position and which car is gone to which dealer. At dealer stock level, regular stock audits and things like that also gives a comfort to a banker in terms of, the stocks which are available. And finally, the point of sale, where the sale is happening. So, pay on sold basis, if that information also is available in terms of win basis. So we have the entire one view and complete transparency, and that is where, it gives a huge confidence and adds strength to this entire thing. Coming to the dealer's role on this thing, and while we have touched upon short-term, long-term mismatch, and that is where I think we have seen a lot of issues. Just pre-COVID, we have seen the inventory cycles were much, much longer, and people, the short-term funds were used for long-term purpose, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But the minute you get into a leaner period, or the things like COVID happened, and suddenly, because of the working capital requirements, we saw the dealers getting into trouble. So that's where I think a big advice to dealers that, that's where financial prudence is required. They need to have a healthy balance sheet. So that's what, as a banker, we would, like to talk.
Yeah, I think financial prudence all around in these difficult times, I think can't get better advice than that. Again, just coming round, Shashank, clearly it looks like forecasting has been a bit of a challenge as well. Tarun said he's been doing it a lot, but I think have things changed? I mean, even looking at the customer, for example, this sudden shift to high-end variants, which has caught a lot of people unawares. I mean, how has the customer changed? And looks like he's even willing to wait and pay, and the discounting days, those really hard bargaining days are also not there. So there seems to be a shift in customer mindset also. So just your thoughts on that, especially trying to forecast exactly, and is that really one of the biggest challenges also?
Yeah, so when it comes to forecasting, in an ideal world, if we could forecast exactly variant-wise, model-wise numbers, surely that's the ideal situation. We can plan our production and hence the inventory at dealerships. You could have a end-to-end clarity and no build-up of stocks. But unfortunately, forecasting has always been an issue. And while forecasting methods have improved, both in mathematical modeling terms and also in terms of the ability to handle big data for analytics, there are a lot of much better tools available. But forecasting still is an issue. Of course, we have moved way ahead from those earlier days, which, very early on, when we used to take numbers from regional offices. So people in the sales always give a figure, which is, let's say, 50. And you ask the brand manager who is doing advertising, says, fantastic, we have a fantastic plan for advertising and it's going to be 100. And we used to just take the average because the sales guy in the field always tells कि भाई सड़क खराब हो गई है, यहाँ लड़ाई हो गई है, यहाँ बारिश हो गई है, इधर फसल खराब हो गई है, and that sort of thing. I know everybody knows here. And for the dealers, we used to take inputs from the dealers under a system called a planned ordering system. So there also we found a lot of issues. Like in the waiting models, a dealer will say that the demand will be much, much higher. Whereas in the models which are not in waiting, they say, oh, model hi khatam ho gaya. So that sort of thing also didn't help. In fact, one dealer, I remember, Calcutta dealer, he said, दूसरे ने क्या बताया? He said, उसने ये बताया, पता हमारा भी वही कर लीजिए. So that sort of thing we have moved beyond. However, I must tell, Hormar, seriously, you mentioned VUCA world. I think it is a Bani world, which is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Therefore, forecasting will always be an issue. I think if you want to maintain a good supply chain end-to-end, you need to have flexibility. So if dealers, you will always get demand wrong here or there. You need to have flexibility in both production and supply terms so that we are able to give to dealers what exactly is the consumer requirement. I heard one panelist, I think he said that the variant-wise has to be given, which is true. But it's difficult for people to convert from one variant to the other. And if they do, their satisfaction levels from consumer side may not be the optimum. Therefore, the most important thing is to have flexibility. And on your point of consumer changing, yes, absolutely. Customer has changed. And you have to keep those OEMs which are able to keep track of consumer requirement changes are the ones which are going to be successful. And for that, you need to have really close connect with the consumer. And the world itself is changing anyway, so consumer choices are changing. And we have seen it in the... a lot of things has also got to do with the changes on taxation or regulatory front or commodity prices or price changes and so on and so forth, which cannot be factored in unless you know. But clearly, consumer choices by nature has changed. And you are right, maybe they are willing to wait more for products which they see they have greater value at that point of time. So that is what I believe. We need to have flexibility so that dealers carry optimum stock and consumers have minimum waiting for their products.
Flexibility and agility, I think clearly that is the way forward. But to be honest, easier said done in this business because as assembly lines are churning out vehicles to kind of change tack is difficult. Tarun, I mean, that is the way forward, but difficult to implement. It has to be done even in the production process to have that level of flexibility. But there's still some lead time, which again goes back to the point of, forecasting as accurately as possible. And as you said earlier, you've done it, but do you think it's become a lot more challenging? And what are the lessons you've learned? And your thoughts also on how the consumer has changed?
So I think this is very interesting, and let me give a perspective to it. I think forecasting is a very unglamorous activity. You don't get to talk to celebrities, you don't get to meet dealers, you don't get to attend these panel discussions. So normally what I have seen is the junior most guy in the sales and marketing thing would do some kind of a forecasting. He'll come to his boss, sir, this is what I have prepared. Now this is a matrix of 18 to something for 6 months. The boss will say, "तूने देख लिया ना पक्का, मैं sign कर दूँ?" Because boss doesn't know even himself, what is to be done. The poor guy is, sir, yeah, sir, मैं देख लिया है, and he'll sign. And then it goes to his boss. And this is how, unfortunately, the forecasting is treated. Like I said, probably most undermined, most unglamorous, but absolutely critical. I would say that, and this is from my experience, that the senior most guy in the chain has to really take absolute responsibility for the forecasting. And this I can say with a lot of pride, that today I am responsible for the 6-month kit ordering. I do it myself. I look at the variants, I talk to dealers, I see the trends. I'm not saying I won't go wrong, but probably the probability of going wrong is much less than that guy who's only on his computer and looking at some data. So first thing is, as seniors, we have to own that responsibility. And I'm telling you, last 1 year, what I have seen, 1.5, 2 years at Hyundai, and of course, based on my previous experience, it does make a difference. It does make a difference because the mismatch, the cost is extremely high. What we don't realize is, what is it we lose when we go wrong? Because we don't even know what that is. We don't even know the sale which did not come to us. And we get, probably too much influenced by, but we're not able to see the data. And then we get into all kinds of malpractices as well. So my point is, one, the senior most guy has to take responsibility on the dealer front. And so many of the dealer partners are sitting here. 4 months back, all of you were wanting us to set up CNG plants. सर प्लीज एक सीएनजी का प्लांट लगा दो, इस गाड़ी की 6 महीना वेटिंग है, इस गाड़ी की 10 महीना वेटिंग है, फलाना है, ढिमकाना है. सडनली नाउ यूल कम, नो सर वो प्राइस बढ़ गया है, फलाना हो गया, ढिमकाना हो गया है. यू मस्ट ऑल्सो अंडरस्टैंड दैट वाइल द मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स एंड थिंग्स विल कीप ऑन चेंजिंग, बट वी नीड टू हैव अ मच मोर बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच. So there is a very thin line. Lakshman Rekha maybe came millions of years back, but there's a very thin line between the demand far exceeding the supply and supply far exceeding the demand. The smartness is, how do you know that you are operating just plus minus 5% of that? The moment you are to the left or you're to the right, I think both situations are very, very harmful. So we need to have collaboration. We need to have a pulse of the market. Regarding softwares and artificial intelligence and all, yes, all kudos to all of them. But I still feel, as of now, I can say with a lot of confidence, and over, like I said, last 30 years, it is all still about yes, you can have a baseline, but it will still require that kind of a, that kind of a moderation, which can only be done by a human mind. And like Shashank mentioned, yes, you have to be flexible. You need to build in those systems. Like my production line, it can change very fast, We have built in those kind of flexibilities. And we need that because everybody realizes the cost of not really meeting the demand. I think that is very important.
No, great points, Tarun. But, just sticking with you, clearly getting forecasting wrong is a costly mistake. But again, we know how the industry works. Is also a key being even more flexible as possible in terms of, changing the mix as rapidly as possible. And what's being done in that area clearly. And again, you've got supply googlies over there as well to deal with.
Look, obviously localization is something which is extremely important because very clearly, if what is 6 months for something which is imported, it is clearly almost 6 weeks for what is not imported. So first thing is very clearly localization. And like everybody said, and including me, that you have to spot the trend much faster than the others. I think somewhere we tend to give too much credence to pending bookings. We all know how bookings vanish when the demand is a little bit slow. So I think ability to read into those numbers, just don't carried away by, I have so many bookings. But no, I don't think so. I think we need to have a pulse, and that is why I'm saying you need to really not only look at the numbers which they are showing, but something much beyond that, and their trend is very important. You have to see the cancellations, you have to see the variant-wise things what are happening, and don't see the averages. Don't see the averages, because averages tend to hide a lot more than they reveal. I think trends are much more important than averages. So these are some of the things. But yes, flexibility is the name of the key. At the same time, I think from a dealer angle also, because customer, yes, while it is ideal, in an ideal world, like what Shashank said, we will like to give the customer what he wants. At the same time, suppose it is festival, customer also wants mobility. So if you can really tell him that, yes, this is the car which can take care of 80% of his needs, but you can get an immediate delivery, I think this is also a very, very practical solution. And like I said, at least we are today in a situation where we can at least offer something to the customer, and things are moving. And I believe very strongly that in the next 5-6 months, we will see that we are very close to meeting the demand, because the way things are easing out, it looks very promising. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tarun. Those were really very, very insightful views and comments. And again, just following the sequence, Ashutosh, you're talking about flexibility. Clearly, given your scale, by the time you think of changing something, you've already made some 10,000 of those, products. So again, is, just given your scale, forecasting even a bigger, even more critical, and, again, having the flexibility to, let's say, change the mix. And again, I just want to ask you another thing on the demand side. Clearly we've seen in the auto side, there have been new models coming out, but really in the two-wheeler space, the cadence of new launches has been not as intense. Is that also an issue with demand? And, again, just getting to the flexibility side as well, and overall managing the whole production side of it.
Sure. So, I think the issue of forecasting is very, very important. But I guess living with a poor forecast, knowing that the poor forecast has happened, is a totally different thing altogether, right? And I guess that's where flexibility comes in, and I think Shashank spoke about it. And I guess it works either ways, works from the OEM sides and works also with our dealer friends. So I guess, things going back in the system as to how that could be possibly improving going forward is a very, very important aspect. I guess it doesn't depend on the scale so much, but I guess the ability to flow back information back into the system and ability to quickly act on it, I guess, will be the determining factor. That said, I guess one of the key areas to work on is also tech, and how tech can play an important role in terms of soliciting the feedback from the ground, getting it flowing back into the system accurately without bump ups at every level, which is, I guess, another big problem. I guess once that happens, my sense is that the overall stress in the system also reduces significantly. So, I know that there are manufacturers who are moving towards replenishment-based fulfillment model. I mean, there are enough industry examples where it has happened, not so much in the auto industry, but I guess I know a lot of people are moving towards that. We on our side, for example, have actually tried to do it in the parts business, and almost 70% of our parts today is a pull-based model rather than push-based system. So I guess these kind of things where tech will play a very important role. Of course, a responsive supply chain, a lot of system orientation at the front end level, all this kind of stitches together to make the forecasting better. And I guess makes the scale a little less important, but I guess these things as paramount.
Right. And, Ravneet, turning to you and then Sabyasachi later, forecasting for, let's say, the EV space, is it more difficult because demand is so dependent on variables not in your control? Fuel prices for one. Fuel prices for one, subsidies, which can be there today, won't be there tomorrow, which really have a huge impact on demand. So in that sense, is it a bit more challenging? How do you foresee it? I mean, or are you working on a case where, let's say there'll be no worst case situation of no subsidies and, way forward like that? So just to get your thoughts, Ravneet, on let's say, and then Sabyasachi as well.
So like I said in the beginning, there is more variability in this business because there is no past data to look at. Even if you look at trends, I mean, things are changing so fast. What today looks like is dramatically different from what 6 months look like. And I guarantee next 6 months look very different, right? So there is more variability. Things like subsidy or other macroeconomic factors impact trends in the long term. They don't impact the next quarter or the following quarter. I think for us, because for the most part, at least the new age EV players, we have the luxury of starting from scratch, and therefore the systems we've architected just allow us to capture information in a much more granular fashion than legacy business have been able to do that. Simply because of just the legacy of where they come from, right? If you're in business 30 years, you have to re-architect your systems, right? So today the ability to figure out, with reasonable degree of confidence that if X input has to happen means Y number of people go to the website, the walk-ins work in a certain manner. Of the walk-ins, so many test drives will happen, bookings will happen, retail will happen. If retail doesn't fructify in 3 months, this is the sort of, it'll peter out in a certain manner. So there is just data, right? It does not take away from the, the judgment that people have, to the point Tarun was making. But it certainly makes even judgment slightly easier because it's basing a lot of data, right? So, and what we try to do very often is to look at, if I don't use my judgment, if I just went by numbers, how close or far we would be from forecast, right? And you realize that it's a self-learning mechanism. So month on month, you keep getting better, right? So unless there is big discontinuity, which obviously by its very nature you can't predict, but the ability to get plus minus 10-15% is sort of already sitting at a fairly healthy level, right? I think which is just, like I said, luxury of starting afresh and just architecting for marrying offline data with online data, which was usually not the easiest thing to do in a legacy business, right? So that allows us a lot more control. Secondly, and this is slightly unique to Ather, eventually maybe become more relevant to other businesses as well, is that our variants are, we have just two variants. We are nowhere near the complexity of a Maruti or a Hyundai or a HMC. But we have two variants, and that too, they are variants on the back of software. So we actually ship one product, right? So in a software world, in a world where a fair degree of varianting can happen on the back of software, suddenly your decision for varianting is happening at the retailer level, right? So you're shipping the same product, and that takes away a huge amount of variability out of the equation, right?
Right. No, but just taking me, Ravneet, just talking about the macroeconomic factors beyond your control. Just taking, let's say, to something like fuel prices. There's a difference when you're in $100 per barrel, price vis-a-vis a $40. I'm sure that does have some impact. And did the demand even take you by surprise, what we've seen in the last 2 years? Because clearly it is the fuel price has played a significant part in that sudden spurt in demand.
For sure, for 100%. Right? So I think there are two things that happened almost simultaneously that led to the blip that we see now, right? And not just actually a blip, but the sort of the inevitable growth that we are seeing now. One is just the just the entry of multiple players with good, strong, credible product, which was really the problem of the industry, right? And that coincided, broadly speaking, time frame with the fuel prices. Now, consumers don't do maths that every month I'm saving X amount of money. It's just a mental thing. Petrol is 110. Damn, it's very expensive now, right? And by the way, there's a good, credible launch I just saw like last month. And those two coming together did play a role. We did see every time there was, even though it may not impact in sales of that particular month, but there are telltale signs. So whenever there was news about petrol prices going up, you saw website visits going up. It's an indicator that people are considering EVs more than they would otherwise, right? So there are not lead and lag indicators, but clearly there's a correlation. And this phase where every day prices were going up, we saw demand going up, and not just in terms of numbers that we track, but also the general buzz in the market. You talk to consumers, earlier they used to ask about product and performance, etc. Now they talk about range. Acha, 1 kilometer mein kitna paisa lagta hai? Questions we never used to be asked earlier, right? So clearly what you're saying is correct.
Yeah. No, because I'm just speaking from my own personal example. Every time I ride my scooter, guy comes and just first thing he asks is the running cost. So doesn't care about the environment. But Sabyasachi, turning to you again, just again, you've come after Ravneet, but what he said clearly is that, predicting or forecasting is important. He's modeled it, there's software to do it. But again, coming back to the point of the really macroeconomic factors, which really kind of play a strong role in the demand for your products.
Yeah, I think 2 points. One, I'll borrow one important point from what Tarun had said about this thing, that forecasting has to be done probably by the senior most guy in the system, which is basically a mix between what the market is saying and the statistics are saying, and what also the market, the channel partners who are there on the ground and your team is saying. So you have to do a mix between the two to get to the right thing. Ultimately, it's like, if I were to use a very on a lighter note, it is like a bartending at the end of the day. You need to know what is the right mix, even though everybody knows that this is the particular mix for a particular drink. Second, I think in the new age sector that we are in, it is slightly more easier because we also know our customers, because every single subsidy that we get, we have a detail about the customer. So which exact town that he has come from, which exact city that he has come from, which is the place. So if I were to say Pune is one of the bigger markets, now which is Pune is a very this thing. So it is Pune, or is it the PMC, or is it Chinchwad, is it Kharki? We know exactly from where the customer is from for that month and the previous history for the past 12 months or 14 months, which I think makes it a little more easier for the new age this thing. Third, of course, as Ravneet said, is we don't have too many models to play with, unlike a four-wheeler segment or HMS, where you have every single model having entry, mid-level, top level, and the automatic segment or something like that, where forecasting becomes that much more difficult. So the variances are rather limited. So hence it makes us a relatively easier job. I'm saying relatively easier job. But yes, you have to have the pulse on the market. Second is in terms of things that, of course, like petrol prices or environmental macroeconomics making a change. Yes, it does have an effect. And we also therefore look at markets which have got a relatively higher petrol prices, because petrol prices are different in different markets in India, as our target markets rather than places where you have a relatively lower. So there is a
broad trend from there.
There's a trend which already shows that there is a. So for example, Rajasthan would be one market which has got a relatively higher EV penetration because of a higher petrol price, rather than a market like say Chandigarh, or say for example any other lower petrol price variant market. So that's, I think, one of the ways which are help us to do more predictable planning.
Right. So channel partners critical in giving the feedback for OEMs to forecast. So just what are you seeing, in the showroom? Obviously, customers changing rapidly, preferences changing. Just to see, in terms of, again, just coming back to the consumer, how dramatically have they changed, and is it again difficult to gauge how their preferences are just moving so fast?
I think I'll put it in the short and the immediate term and the long term. What we have seen in the last 2 years and currently what is ongoing is that whatever stocks you currently holding at dealer points, we are somehow, sort of managing to convince the customer in the right way to, accept it, considering that there are certain delays on certain variants. But of course, this going forward, I'm sure will ease out the moment we have this chip shortages issue being addressed. That's when I think we will need to do a lot more close planning with our respective OEMs, whether it is like how Tarunji just mentioned, that at their level it is the senior most who is looking at the planning. Similarly, at the dealership level, it has to be the senior most who will do the planning for forecasting. And not just that, I think the OEM will have to be, working alongside the dealer to understand the ground reality. I think India being a large market, different regions, they have different choices, different preferences. One state might have a color preference, the other may not. So all these ground realities have to be really factored in while you plan stocks, specifically when the when the supply issues eased out.
Right. And Vikas, again, taking off from what you said last time, prudence, very critical. Clearly, forecasting is a big challenge. I mean, from your side, on the retail side, I mean, what would you like to see? A bit of a conservative approach in kind of, the way forward?
So, Amos, we take the key we take from the market and the industry, basically, what kind of forecasting is happening. So we really don't have OEM level data or things like that, but the industry grows at certain pace. So we kind of follow that method to plan our budgets and what kind of numbers we need to deliver. So that's one key which we follow. And secondly, obviously the other play left for the bankers is also the market share. So how you can increase your market share within that the limited growth which is happening. So these are the two important items which we follow. And as we also, and hearing everybody, it's a changing environment. We are also seeing that demand is changing and the inventory level. Just to give an example, maybe about 6 months back, the stock levels were almost zero. The demand was very high. Supply was not there. Today we are back to almost pre-COVID levels where 30-35 day kind of inventory levels have come back now. So we need to keep all this in mind. We need to also, and this is something which I talk to dealers and whenever friends at OEMs say that right stocking is very important. That what kind of stocks need to be managed at the dealer level is very important. So and that's where I think OEMs can help in a big way because that they have the know-how in terms of what demand supply actually is there in the market. So that's how we kind of follow the entire ecosystem.
Right. Well, I'm just mindful of the time. I think we've got time for just one more round, I think on a very important topic, which is demand going forward. I think there's a lot of talk that things are going a little soft. I mean, we're still nowhere near what our historic highs before COVID. So, Shashank, crystal ball gazing, next 6 months looking at demand. I think right now we've got enough momentum, festive season, but well beyond that, just looking into the future, how do you see things panning out? Clearly, I think the supply side issues, semiconductors are going to be sorted. So it's going to be now real proper demand. And all these bookings also. Just talk of multiple bookings, everyone's talking of, so many thousand, 100,000, whatever. So it's become a nice fashionable number for all of us to tweet. But, just seriously, just looking forward, is there a little bit of cause to worry because, just the way things are looking in the panning out in the market? Again, economic things are good, but, globally there are a lot of upheavals and we are globally linked. So whatever happens, it impacts us as well. So again, just for all of you all, just to get some quick thoughts on the next 6 months.
First of all, I think while the bookings exact numbers would be questionable, direction seems to be pretty strong. So I know there are guys who have booked in multiple dealers of the same model. Some people who have booked different models at the same dealership, and some who have who have booked in different dealers at different OEMs as well. So we don't know what that corrective factor we should apply to the pending bookings.
But can't technology at least give you some kind of closer,
Yes, definitely.
more
And that-
accurate picture?
Yeah, definitely. And that's what the OEMs try to do. So it's not just that we look at the number and say, hey, let's make these many vehicles. It's not like that. It's a mix of judgment and also it's a mix of a lot of data which you can mine with the current analytics is available. I think he mentioned about a judgment being applied to the numbers finally. And Tarun mentioned judgment being applied by the senior most guy. But actually judgment, to my mind, should be applied by the most competent person who knows and is in touch with that market. It may not be possible for one individual unless he has experience of all the regions, etc., which he was mentioning, that there has to be some sort of a judgment applied based on experience. Coming to the next 6 months, and before we do, I'll quickly tell you what has happened in the last 9 months. So we have had Q4 of last financial year, Jan, Feb, March, 9.2 lakhs sale. We have April, May, June, which is Q1, 9.1. That is 18.3. Then this quarter, with a 3.42, I'm talking of passenger vehicles, 3.42 in July, 3.29 in August. We can get up to that 10 lakh mark this quarter. So you will probably see Jan to September 28.6 lakh at the sale. And you can look at another rate of about 3 lakh or 3 lakh 10 for the balance 6 month. That makes it another 18, 19 lakhs. So you can get to that figure, which April to September is about 19.5 lakhs. So you can add another 18, 19 to it. So you are in that range of 3.8 to 3.9 million. That is what looks like. Of course, I must tell you one final point because we are running short of time or much. The ability of the industry to convert these bookings, deflated by whatever numbers, would depend on how you manage your production with respect to the underlying demand pattern. So if the underlying demand pattern is for a X model, but you are not capable to produce X but can only produce Y, then you can end up with a higher stock levels of Y. So you may produce more but may not necessarily reflect in sales. So I think going forward, in a longer term, it will all depend on how the economy shapes up. Clearly there are some red flags like inflation, like maybe liquidity at some point, interest rates going up. Clearly these are some problems which we may encounter in the next few months.
Thanks, Shashank. Tarun, again, 6 months for you all. Shashank has given a kind of an overview of the macroeconomic factors, inflation, interest rates, etc. But are you also bullish that you've got enough momentum at least to take you past that, and maybe then it's beyond that one has to be a little mindful of?
Absolutely, I agree with Shashank, and demand looks robust. And to be very honest, I'll be very, very honest here. Last 2 months, it's like Sheraya. Because we have been only listening fancy terms like stagflation, and this has happened, US this has happened, Europe this has happened, no gas, no blah. I believe that India has shown a very strong resilience, and we need to be much more confident about the domestic consumption.
In fact, the economy is going faster than others.
Yes, so things are looking good as of now, and I fully agree that yes, we need to keep a tab on those geopolitical risks which still exist very strongly, and also this when the demand softens, then it doesn't soften by 2%, 3%. We have all of us have had enough experience to see that things can go bad very fast. So we need to be very much aware of what is happening. We need to really, because we have learned some very good things, that how we can manage sales with reasonable inventories, how blind this thing of market share or numbers does not do any good. Retail is much more important than wholesale, and retail is the ultimate truth. So I think a lot of good learnings have happened. I just hope that all of us as a team do not forget those learnings when times are slightly tough. So this is my only thing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tarun. Ashutosh, the biggest in the two-wheeler space, clearly, lot riding on way forward demand. It's been a little rocky right now. How do you see the next 6 months, and even for the overall two-wheeler industry?
Sure. So, I mean, the two-wheeler industry, I especially, is not plagued so much by supply side pressures. So, we'll have the demand, and that will make us run. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. I mean, we saw Q1, the rural demand coming back strongly. We see currently the urban markets manifesting well. I think run up to the festive, we have seen a lot of the smaller festives that we have had. They also doing really well. So we had Ganesh and we had Onam that's currently still on, right in the Chingam month. So we are confident, I guess, that from a festival is entirely about sentiment, and I guess that sentiment seems to be turning positive. I guess one very important factor is also the way the replacement demand is coming back. So one of the reasons for dip post the pandemic was the replacement demand, and people kind of held on to their products a much more longer. We had data to support that. If you went to our workshop and saw the bikes which were more than 4 years old, I mean, customers were holding on to their bikes much more longer. So we see that coming back, and the replacement demand is now hovering around 20 to 22% in the industry, and we think that augurs very well that customers in a good sentiment environment will come back and manifest in terms of sales. So my sense is the way the inventory is also building up, the overall mood is optimistic. I mean, I was reading the FADA report. We're also entering a region of relative price stability. That has been one of the factors which has kind of pegged us back. But my sense is that with all the things that are adding up, it looks like a good festive for the two-wheeler industry, ICE especially.
Ravneet, for you all, it looks like just up and up with this is the future, this is the way forward. So I think clearly, I think from your point of view, its demand is, but you see it flattening out at any point? I mean, honestly, I mean, clearly right now, it's such a small base and everyone, this transition to EVs happening at a rapid pace, but do you see it flattening out at all before it picks up again?
See, if I just look back, Hamas, on the last few months, right? So we are a step removed from the absolute industry size, because what impacts us more is the pace of electrification, which is switching, as opposed to, and this is really early stages of, it's big enough market for us to, enough headroom really. But one thing we've seen across all categories globally, right? Whenever transition happens, you always tend to get it wrong and you always tend to underestimate, right? So if I look at numbers, last October, e-scooters as a percentage of total scooters about 5.5%, give or take, right? And next couple of months we saw another percentage point going up. We expected that to be an aberration, because there was nothing else that's happening that was moving it like 1 percentage point month on month. 9 months later today, we're sitting about 13 to 15% penetration. Now, logically speaking, last year if somebody had asked me, I couldn't give a reason why that would happen, because is there discontinuity? No, sure, macroeconomic factors came in, petrol prices, but were they so, was the piece of news so huge to drive this kind of adoption? So logically speaking, no, right? But the fact is, it is going at a much faster pace. For someone like us who has every reason to be optimistic, right? Even we got it wrong. We underestimated the pace of change, right? So I don't see this slowing down. I don't see electrification slowing down. I don't have as strong a view on the overall market, which I think HMC, other people would have. But within that pie, the transition is happening, and I don't think that next 3 or 4 quarters, anything sort of slowing down there.
Right. And Sabyasachi, clearly demand is there. We know that. Now the question is whether you underestimate it or overestimate it. So I think next 6 months, how do you, are you very, very optimistic?
Yes, and obviously there are two things which are from a macro aspect which is very important for us to understand. India normally has been adapting to new technologies very fast. I've been in telecom in my earlier states. In the way people have adopted to newer technologies in telecom, how digitization of payments have come into India and how easily they have been gone down to the last mile. Similarly, I see that this EV as a category by itself the decimation of this category down to the last mile is going to be very fast. And probably it will be, as Ravneet said, faster than what we are even imagining. So this forum that we are talking about, we would be actually, my guess is having a very serious discussion probably next year sometime this time in terms of our demand to supply issues which are going to be there. So yes, I'm extremely optimistic. This market, we've already seen some green shoots of the festival thing happening. And with new models and new markets opening up, obviously this is going to be something which is going to be good for the EV industry as such. And within the EV industry, obviously we also expect.
So no red flags you feel going forward?
As of now, there are no red flags that we can
I think
think
Shashank
of.
wants to
Shashank
jump
has
in
a
there.
point, yeah, sure.
No. I just think, yes, surely at any point of time, and I think Tarun brought that point out very finely, demand can shift in large swings in some segments or the other. Gas prices can shift CNG demand, for example. Petrol diesel differential can shift diesel petrol ratios. Regulatory stringency, for example, can shift demand in many segments across. So while we keep with the basic direction which we discussed about forecasting, also have to be mindful about judgment and data, but we have to be mindful about such uncertain factors which can have, in fact, a very large impact.
Right. Yeah, and just on that subject, actually, before I go to the others, is it looks like clearly what is driving EV sales are, let's be honest, the economics of it. Customers want to save their wallet, not the planet. That's very obvious. So, and I think that those variables also will impact demand considerably, which sometimes, again, as I said earlier, are beyond the control of the OEM.
Absolutely, completely agree on that. Economics plays a very important part. But also, as I said earlier, Indians' ability to take in new technology by design is far better we have seen in the last decade. You look at the way probably a 4G penetration has happened in India, you look at the way digitization of money that has happened in India, we are probably one of the best digital economies in the world, probably, if I am not wrong. Okay. The way we have also, you look at a simple thing that we need to have this 1 crore COVID injections which have happened, and today each one of us have on the certificate on our phone. I was reading a interview of Mr. Jaishankar. He said he and his son were in the US. So Mr. Jaishankar produced his certificate, COVID certificate on the phone, and Dr. Jaishankar's son, who is a US citizen, had a big lengthy paper out of his wallet and he produced that. So what it shows is that, we have actually adopted to it very quickly. Now, as far as EV adoption is concerned, yes, economics is going to play a very, very important part. There is no denial about it. Okay, but as we said, that will people adopt it? Answer is yes. And as Ravneet also said, like if last year and this year it has been a 10% swing, I would be not caught very off guard if we actually see a double of that happening by the next 1 year. Provided we are able to match up with the consumer expectation in terms of the product, the quality, and good brands coming into it and doing the rest of the work. Thank you.
So Soham, you've heard, I think everyone's quite optimistic going forward next 6 months. But, I think everyone's fallen in love with the car again. Do you think that's going to continue? Everyone's going to jump back into Ola and Ubers like before? Or, just to get your sense, do you think this will continue? Shashank was talking about, we're looking at inching to 4 million sales in the year. So, sorry? With the red flags, yeah. So the red flags are there. Just want to know whether you're as optimistic or you see some red flags as well.
So I think I'll take the liberty of, on behalf of FADA and my dealer network, I would say that we as dealers are very, very positive about the India growth story. I'm sure that, we are looking at good demand going forward. Whether it is short term, there could be some red flags, as he says, because monsoons in some parts of the country have been a little erratic. There has been flooding in some areas, whereas there has been droughts in some. So there could be some pressure in the near term, I would say, whether it is on the entry-level segment or maybe the ICE two-wheelers. Those could feel a little bit of pressure, but going forward in the long run, I see there is a huge growth story. what will also contribute to this growth story are two factors which one of my co-panelists had just mentioned. One is the replacement demand. I see that coming in largely now. That was missing in the last 2 years when people were retaining their old cars and their two-wheelers as well. Now that's coming in for replacement, and which is another important factor I feel is the scrappage policy. If the government takes it up in a serious note and it is well implemented across all the states, I see that that will generate a lot of replacement demand.
Right. And because we've run out of time, but give you the last word on this. Clearly everyone's quite optimistic demand going forward, and as Soham said, even replacement demand that's also coming in.
Right.
How do you see the next 6 months?
So, at the bank, we are also very optimistic in terms of how this is going to pan out. One interesting data that savings of customers have gone up, and during COVID period, the kind of savings they have done in terms of now the entire thing is coming out in terms of travel, hotels, and buying of. So we are seeing consumer product demands moving up, and auto is part of it. So we are extremely bullish that this season and festive season is going to go one of the best.
Revenge buying is still going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Thanks very much. I think we've completely run out of time. Thank you to all our panelists. Really, we had a nice cross-section, give their points of view from their respective industries and brands. Thank you very much again, and hand it over back to FADM.
That was indeed a very power-packed and an insightful panel discussion with a lot many takeaways. Our gratitude to everyone on the dais. I would now request Mr. Soham Mishra, Mr. Anil K. Agrawal, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal and Mr. Govind Mewar to kindly come and felicitate our esteemed panel of guests here. Along with Mr. Soham Mishra, Mr. Anil K. Agarwal, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Mr. Govind Mewar, kindly come on the dais to felicitate our panel of guests. Firstly, I would request Mr. Ashutosh Verma, National Sales Head, Hero MotoCorp, kindly hand over the memento to Mr. Ashutosh Verma. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Now I would request Mr. Ravneet S. Fokela, the Chief Business Officer, Ather Energy, to kindly come forward for the felicitation. Mr. Sabyasachi Chakraborty, National Head Sales, Two-Wheeler, Greaves Electric Mobility. Mr. Tarun Garg, Hyundai Motor India. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly put your hands together. It was indeed a very enriching session. The panel discussion was amazing. Mr. Shashank Srivastav, Executive Director, Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Mr. Vikas Pandey, Executive Vice President, HDFC Bank. And Mr. Hormuz Surabji, Editor, Autocar India. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I request you all to kindly come forward for a group photograph.